My right hand burns with the cold fire of perpetual dying. The flesh peels away in sheets of grey-black necrosis, and beneath, pink tissue erupts in moist bubbles of regeneration. The cycle completes every 73 seconds. I have counted. For 11 years, 4 months, and 16 days, I have counted. They are bowing before me now. 300 pilgrims packed into the chapel of enduring devotion, their foreheads pressed to stone worn smooth by 10,000 prostrations before me. They pray to my hand, not to me, never to me. To the thing embedded in my palm, a fragment of knuckle bone from St. Celestria, the twice martyred, yellowed and ancient, visible through the circular wound that never closes. I want to scream. My throat remembers how the muscles still function, but I cannot. The implanted inhibitor at the base of my skull ensures my silence. A living reliquary must not disturb the faithful with its suffering. Let me tell you how I came to be this thing. My name was Andros Kellyan. I was 19 years old when they selected me, with dark hair that my father said came from his mother's side. Strong Terran genetics preserved through millennia. I was thin, always thin, because on Hive World Gloriana Prime, the lower stacks received corpse starch rations calculated to maintain function, not comfort. I worked in sub-level 77 of Factorum Complex Epsilon, operating punch-press machinery that stamped out armor plates for Chimera transports. 12-hour shifts, 6 days a cycle. My hands were calloused, my fingernails permanently blackened with machine oil that no amount of industrial solvent could remove. I was nobody. One of 6 billion nobodies on a world that existed only to feed the Imperium's endless appetite for materials. But I had something. One thing. Every 7th day I was permitted 4 hours of rest cycle freedom. I spent those hours in the small hab unit I shared with my father and younger brother, Micah. Our unit was 8 meters by 4 meters. Sleeping platform, basic hygiene alcove, single heating element. The walls were bare rockcrete, stained with centuries of condensation. But we had kept one thing from before my mother died in the Factorum accident. A small data slate, ancient and scratched, that contained 300 pages of pre-imperial poetry. My father would read to us. His voice, rough from breathing recycled air for 48 years, would soften as he spoke words from old Earth. Words about green hills and open sky, concepts so foreign they seemed like mythology. Micah, only 14, would close his eyes and try to imagine blue instead of the eternal gray of underhive ceiling lights. One day, my father would say, when you've earned enough credits, you might see a viewport. Ships need crew. Some of them have windows. It was a stupid dream. Crew positions went to families with connections, not Factorum workers who would die at their presses and be rendered down for protein like everyone else. But it was my dream. I would lie on my sleeping mat and imagine it. Actual stars, not the pale luminators. Actual darkness between them, not the omnipresent haze of pollution. I was happy. I understand now how strange that sounds. Happy in a cramped box, eating recycled dead, working myself toward an early grave. But I had my father's voice reading ancient words. I had Micah's questions about things neither of us would ever see. I had 4 hours every 7th day where I was more than a serial number and a labor assignment. I had hope. The ecclesiarchy priests came on the 3rd day of month 7, year 847, M41 by the local Gloriana calendar. I remember because it was 2 days before my scheduled rest cycle, and I was calculating, How many more chimera plates I needed to stamp before I could go home? The factorum floor went silent. Impossible, normally. 3,000 presses operating simultaneously create a wall of sound that makes thought difficult. But when the priests entered, preceded by armed frateris militia in crimson robes, the shift supervisor hit the master shutdown. 3,000 machines falling silent at once creates its own kind of sound, a massive exhalation, like a giant dying. There were 5 priests. Their robes were actual cloth, not the synthetic fibers we wore. Real textile, probably spun on an agri-world somewhere, dyed deep black and embroidered with golden imperial aquilus. The lead priest was old, his face a topography of wrinkles, his augmetic eyes clicking and whirring as they scanned the assembled workers. "The God Emperor has need," he announced, his voice amplified by a vox hailer implanted in his throat. The sound echoed off the rock-crete walls, distorting into metallic layers. "A great honor comes to this factorum. One among you shall be chosen to bear the sacred remains of Saint Celestria, the twice martyred, she who died for the Emperor's glory on the fields of Mashello III, and was resurrected to die again on the walls of Hive Tertius." 3,000 workers stood in absolute silence. I felt my bowels turn to ice water. Whatever this was, it was not opportunity. The ecclesiarchy did not come to the lower stacks to distribute blessings. "The sacred texts are clear," the priest continued. "A living reliquary must be young, of untainted flesh, and possess the physical capacity to endure the Emperor's gift. Step forward if you are between the ages of 15 and 25, have no augmetic replacements, and have committed no infractions against imperial law in the past solar year." Around me, workers shifted uncomfortably. Age was the key factor. Most factorum laborers were older. The young were usually assigned to more dangerous work in the deep hives or conscripted into the planetary defense force. But our section had been spared the last 3 conscription sweeps due to production quotas. There were perhaps 50 of us who met the criteria. I stood still. Survival instinct screamed not to move, not to be noticed. "Step forward now," the priest commanded, "or your entire section will be subject to purity investigation." Purity investigation. That meant everyone's documentation reviewed, every genetic marker examined, every statement ever made to any official analyzed for signs of heresy. It meant weeks of interrogation. It meant people would disappear, probably dozens, probably including my father and brother, because authorities always assumed family units shared contamination. I stepped forward. So did 43 others. The priests walked among us, examining us like livestock. Augmetic eyes scanned our bodies, probably measuring bone density, organ function, genetic markers. They eliminated candidates quickly. Too short, too tall, wrong blood type, previous injury that left microscopic scarring. Within 10 minutes, they had reduced us to 12 candidates. The lead priest stopped in front of me. His augmetic eyes clicked, refocusing, apertures dilating and contracting. "This one," he said. The militia moved immediately, gripping my arms with hands that were too strong. I felt the servos in their augmetic fingers. I was pulled from the line before I could speak, before I could think. "Father," I shouted, scanning the assembled workers, finding his face in the crowd, gray-bearded, horror-stricken. "Father, The words cut off. One of the militia had injected something into my neck. Not unconsciousness, paralysis, My legs stopped working, my voice stopped working, only my eyes remained under my control, darting frantically as they dragged me toward the factorum exit. The last thing I saw was my father, one hand raised slightly, as if to reach for me across 50 meters of impossible distance. They took me to the upper spire. I had never been above sub-level 50 in my entire life. The upper levels were for administratum official, merchant traders, and ecclesiarchy personnel. The air changed as we ascended in the service elevator, grew less heavy, less toxic. By the time we reached spire level 147, I could breathe without feeling the rasp of pollution coating my lungs. The paralytic wore off gradually. By the time they placed me on the surgical altar in the Cathedral of Eternal Devotion's preparation chapel, I had regained control of my voice. "Please," I said. My throat was raw, the word barely recognizable. "Please, I don't understand. What is this?" The lead priest appeared above me, framed by vaulted ceiling frescoes showing the emperor ascending to the golden throne. "You have been chosen for the highest honor a citizen of the Imperium can receive," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You will become a living reliquary, a walking shrine to Saint Celestria. Her sacred bone will be implanted into your body, and through you the faithful shall experience her divine presence." "I don't want this," I said. "Please, my family needs me. My father and brother. Your family will be compensated. They will receive increased rations for 10 years and exemption from 1 conscription cycle. Your sacrifice ensures their survival." "It's not a sacrifice if I don't choose it." The priest's expression didn't change. "The God Emperor does not require your choice. He requires your obedience. You have been selected by his divine will, working through our sacred instruments of measurement. To refuse is to reject his blessing, heresy for which the punishment is immediate execution and your family's classification as heretically tainted." The cold calculation clicked into place in my mind. If I resisted, they would kill me and destroy my father and brother. If I complied, at least they would live. "What?" My voice cracked. "What will happen to me?" "The implantation will take approximately 4 hours. The bone must be surgically embedded in your primary palm. We have determined your right hand based on genetic handedness markers. The surrounding flesh will be removed in a circular pattern to allow pilgrims to view the sacred relic. You will be fitted with an inhibitor to prevent vocal disruption of ceremonies. You will be given longevity treatments to extend your service. You will be assigned to a mobile shrine unit that travels between hive worlds, bringing the Emperor's blessing to the faithful." "Will it hurt?" The priest tilted his head, augmetic eyes clicking. "Constantly," he said. "The saint's bone emits low-level radiation, a byproduct of her holy martyrdom on atomic scorched Marcello III. The radiation will cause continuous tissue necrosis in your hand and forearm. However, you will also be treated with regenerative compounds that will regrow the damaged tissue. The cycle will continue indefinitely." My mind struggled to process this. For how long? The average living reliquary serves for 30 to 40 years before the regenerative compounds cause catastrophic cellular degradation, though we have documented cases of service exceeding 80 years. 80 years. 80 years of my hand dying and being reborn over and over, while I stood silent and people prayed to a piece of dead bone. "I don't want this," I whispered. "The Emperor protects," the priest said. It was not a blessing. It was a statement of conclusion. The conversation was over. They strapped me to the altar. Leather restraints, old and stained, dark with ancient sweat and blood from previous recipients. How many had lain here before me? How many had whispered the same pleas? The surgery priests entered, robed figures with augmetic arms, terminating in an array of cutting implements, injection systems, and cauterization tools. They moved in perfect silence, efficient as servitors. They did not give me unconsciousness. "The implantation must be performed while you are aware," the lead priest explained. "The sacred texts are specific. The reliquary must experience the full measure of the transformation so that your suffering becomes part of the holy tribute." The first incision split my right palm from the base of my middle finger to my wrist. I screamed. The sound echoed off vaulted ceilings, merged with hymns playing from hidden speakers, layered chanting of "The Emperor protects" in High Gothic. They peeled back flesh and muscle, exposing the bone structure of my hand. I could see it, white bone, pink muscle, red blood pooling. My hand that had operated punch presses, that had held the data slate while my father read, that had ruffled Micah's hair. They brought forth the reliquary container, ornate gold and crystal, held by two lesser priests who chanted prayers I didn't understand. Inside, on black velvet, lay a fragment of bone perhaps 3 centimeters long, yellowed, ancient, unremarkable, except for a faint luminescence that might have been reflection or might have been something else. The surgery priests extracted the bone with long instruments. As they brought it toward my opened palm, I felt it. Heat, not warmth. Heat like standing too close to a furnace. The bone was hot, impossibly hot, burning despite being isolated from flame. They placed it into my palm, settling it against the exposed bone structure. The heat intensified. I smelled cooking meat, my own flesh, boiling where it contacted the relic. They spoke prayers in High Gothic while they worked, welding the saint's bone to mine with medical-grade ceramite bonding compound and micro-sutures that would dissolve into my tissue. They did not close the wound. Instead, they removed a circular section of flesh, perhaps 4 centimeters in diameter, creating a permanent window into my palm. The bone sat there, visible, yellowed, wrong. They injected me with compounds, regenerative serums that would force my cells to divide continuously, fighting the radiation damage. They installed the vocal inhibitor, drilling into the base of my skull, threading control filaments into my throat muscles. They tattooed my forehead with the mark of the ecclesiarchy, a human silhouette holding up one hand, the universal symbol of a living reliquary. When they finished, the lead priest leaned close to my face. "Speak now," he said. "Test your voice. You will wish to remember what it sounds like." "Fuck you," I said. "Fuck all of you. Fuck your saint. Fuck your god emperor. Fuck." He activated the inhibitor. My throat locked. The words died. I could breathe, but speech was impossible. My vocal cords simply would not respond to neural commands. I could make sounds involuntarily, gasps, whimpers, the sound of air moving through my throat. But words, language, gone. "The Emperor protects," the priest said. "You will serve him faithfully, and in your suffering, bring his light to the masses." They lifted me from the altar. My legs barely functioned. The regenerative compounds were already working. I could feel them, chemical fire racing through my bloodstream, forcing cells to divide faster than nature intended. My hand burned. The cold fire. The flesh around the embedded bone had already begun to die, turning gray-black, peeling. Then it grew back, pink tissue bubbling up from beneath, forcing away the dead flesh, fresh and new and immediately beginning to die again. 73 seconds. Later, I would count. But in that moment, time had no meaning. There was only the cycle, beginning for the first time, that would continue until I was dead or whatever passed for death in whatever I was becoming. They dressed me in ceremonial robes, cloth like the priests wore, but pure white, the color of sacrifice and purity. They hung golden chains from my shoulders, attached small aquila pendants to the chains. They put rings on the fingers of my left hand, rings with sacred seals, relics of other saints, lesser bones and scraps of cloth. I was no longer Andros Kellion, factorum worker, who dreamed of seeing stars. I was Living-Reliquary 743, carrying the knucklebone of Saint Celestria, the twice martyred. They assigned me to Mobile Shrine Unit 37, which serviced the Gloriana system's 17 inhabited worlds. The shrine was a converted bulk transport, its cargo holds transformed into chapels and prayer chambers. There were 47 of us, 20 living reliquaries carrying various saints' bones, 15 priests who managed our display and movement, and 12 armed guards who ensured we did not attempt escape. I learned quickly that I was considered fortunate. Some reliquaries carried bones embedded in their spines, forcing them into permanent postures of devotion. Others had fragments placed in their skulls, just beneath the skin, visible as lumps under their tattooed scalps. One man, Reliquary 729, carried a saint's entire finger embedded in his throat, the bone visible as a vertical ridge in his neck. He could not turn his head more than a few degrees without agony. My hand, they told me, was a blessing. Only one limb, only peripheral damage. In week 1, the pain was continuous and absolute. Every 73 seconds, my flesh died and was reborn. The sensation was beyond any vocabulary I possessed. Imagine your hand immersed in acid, the skin sloughing away, nerves exposed. Now imagine that exposed flesh immediately regenerating, growing back with a hot needle sensation of rapid cell division, every nerve ending firing, screaming its existence. Now repeat, forever. I could not sleep. The pain was too intense. They gave me stimulants to keep me functional during display hours. 8 hours per day when we stood in our assigned chapel positions while pilgrims filed past to pray and weep and beg blessings from our embedded bones. During those hours, I had to hold my right hand elevated, palm forward, so the bone was clearly visible. Pilgrims would drop to their knees before me. They would weep. They would beg Saint Celestria to heal their sick children, to grant them prosperity, to forgive their sins. I stood silent, one arm raised, dead-faced, while my hand died and lived and died. At night, during the 6 hours we were permitted to rest in our dormitory cells, I would lie on the thin mattress and try not to look at my hand. The transformation was accelerating. By day 5, the necrosis had spread past my wrist. The entire back of my hand was a landscape of gray-black decay, peeling in sheets like burned paper. Beneath, the new flesh was too pink, too raw, like the skin of something newborn and unready for existence. I tried to pray, not to the emperor they claimed watched over humanity, but to anything that might end this. The prayers went nowhere. There was only the cycle, 73 seconds, death and birth, death and birth. By week 2, I discovered I could no longer remember my father's face. Not clearly. I could remember he had a beard, grey-streaked. I could remember his voice. But his face had become a blur, like a poorly focused pic capture. Terror seized me. If I was forgetting him after 2 weeks, what would remain after 2 years? After 20? I tried to hold on to Micah's face. 14 years old, dark hair like mine, gap between his front teeth where he'd lost one in a factorum accident, and the replacement had grown in crooked. I repeated these details to myself, desperate to cement them in memory. But already they felt like facts I was reciting, not memories I was experiencing. On day 17, we made orbit around Hive World Scholastia Tertius. The pilgrimage schedule called for a 3-day surface visit, displaying us in the planetary cathedral. They marched us down the transport ramp in solemn procession, 20 reliquaries in white robes, hands or heads or necks visible bearing their embedded bones. The crowds were massive. Hundreds of thousands of faithful packed into a cathedral space designed for perhaps 50,000. They screamed and wept and pushed forward, desperate to touch us, to be near the bones we carried. I felt hands on my robes, pulling, grasping. Someone kissed the hem of my garment. Someone else touched my exposed hand, the dying flesh, and I felt their fingers press into necrotic tissue that should not be touched. I could not scream. The inhibitor prevented it. I could only stand, dead-faced, while they worshipped my agony. That night in the dormitory, I tried to kill myself for the first time. I found a section of exposed piping in the hygiene alcove, old metal, edges sharp where corrosion had eaten the surface. I pressed my left wrist against it and pulled, dragging flesh across corroded edge. Blood welled up, hot and immediate. The guards found me within minutes. The dormitory was monitored, of course. They always found us. They cleaned the wound, bandaged it, added a note to my file. The lead priest, a different one assigned to Mobile Unit 37, younger than the one who had overseen my surgery, came to speak with me in private. "Reliquary 743, he said, voice calm, clinical. You are serving the God Emperor with your suffering. This is the highest honor. Why would you reject it?" I could not answer. The inhibitor prevented speech. I could only stare at him with what I hoped was sufficient hatred. "I see," he said, as if my silence had been eloquent. "You believe this is cruelty. You do not yet understand. The Emperor requires sacrifice. All of us sacrifice. I have given 40 years of my life to serve in the ecclesiarchy. I have never known the touch of another person in affection, never tasted wine, never experienced any pleasure except the satisfaction of duty fulfilled. My sacrifice is different from yours, but it is sacrifice nonetheless." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The difference is that I chose mine. You did not, but choice is a luxury the Imperium cannot afford. We are at war with forces that would consume reality itself. Every moment of every day, billions die to hold back the darkness. Your suffering, your hand dying and living eternally, is a tiny fragment of the vast suffering that keeps humanity alive. Accept it. Find peace in your purpose." He left me then, with my bandaged wrist and my dying hand. and the absolute certainty that there would be no peace, no acceptance, no finding meaning in this horror. There was only the cycle. By week 3, my right arm up to the elbow had entered the death-rebirth cycle. The process had slowed. Now each cycle took 4 minutes. My entire forearm would necrotize, turn black and gray and begin to slough, and then regenerate from beneath. The sensation had evolved. It was no longer burning agony. It was wrongness, a deep, fundamental violation of what flesh should do. Cells should not divide this fast. Tissue should not die and live and die in endless cycle. I began to feel the radiation more clearly. The saint's bone emitted it constantly, a fact they had told me but which I had not truly understood. Now I felt it, like heat that was not heat, like something pushing outward from my palm, pressing against reality, making space wrong around my hand. Pilgrims said they could feel it too. They called it the saint's presence, divine warmth, blessed radiance. I knew what it was. Atomic decay, particles sloughing off ancient bone that had been exposed to weapons designed to murder cities. There was nothing divine about it, just physics and damage, and my body desperately trying to survive something survival was impossible against. By month 6, I had developed a technique for enduring the display hours. I would withdraw my consciousness inward, retreating to a small, quiet space in my mind where I could recite facts. Factorum production quotas, shift schedules, the poetry my father had read. The poetry was fading. I could remember there were 300 pages on the data slate, but the words themselves were disappearing. I could recall a handful of lines, in vacant or in pensive mood, and once more unto the breach, and the woods are lovely, dark and deep. They meant nothing to me now. Just sounds. During display hours, I learned to watch the pilgrims without truly seeing them. Their faces blurred together into a mass of weeping, desperate humanity. They came with their sick children, their dying fathers, their broken bodies. They begged the saint's bone to grant miracles. Nothing happened. The children stayed sick. The fathers died. The bodies remained broken. But they kept coming, because the priests told them faith was its own reward, that even unanswered prayers brought one closer to the Emperor's light. I wondered if they believed it. I wondered if belief even mattered in the face of such continuous disappointment. I stopped wondering. Wondering was a human behavior, and I was discovering I was becoming less human. By month 9, the necrosis cycle had stabilized at my elbow. The regenerative compounds in my bloodstream had reached equilibrium with the radiation. Enough to continuously rebuild tissue, not enough to allow the damage to spread further. My right arm, from elbow to fingertips, was now a permanent landscape of dying flesh. Pilgrims found it beautiful. The mark of suffering, they called it. Visual proof of martyrdom. I found it fascinating in a detached way. The patterns of decay were not random. They followed vascular pathways, nerve clusters, the underlying architecture of my anatomy. I began to recognize the stages. Stage 1, cellular death, gray pallor spreading. Stage 2, tissue breakdown, black edges, peeling. Stage 3, regeneration beginning, pink tissue bubbling. Stage 4, new flesh, too smooth and alien. Then, immediately back to stage 1. 4 minutes for a complete cycle now. I had counted thousands of cycles, tens of thousands. In year 1, they rotated our display locations. We visited 47 different hive worlds across 3 systems. Billions of pilgrims. all identical in their desperation, their hope, their worship of dead bones. I met another reliquary during a rare rest period, Reliquary 592, an older man who had served for 18 years. He carried a fragment of Saint Markov's rib embedded in his chest, just over his heart. The flesh there was gone, replaced by a crystal window that showed the white bone beneath, surrounded by the red pulse of his living heart. We could not speak, but we had learned a limited sign language, simple gestures the priests allowed because it kept us calm. He signed to me. "How long you?" I signed back. 1 year. He signed, "Gets easier." I signed, "How?" He signed, "Stop being you, become thing. Things don't hurt." His signing was crude, lacking proper grammar, suggesting brain degradation. I wondered if that was the ease he meant, losing enough cognitive function that suffering became abstract. I resolved not to let that happen to me. I would remember. I would stay Andros Kellyan, factorum worker, who had a father and brother, who dreamed of stars. But by year 2, I could no longer remember what my father's voice sounded like. I knew he had read poetry. I knew the sound had been rough, damaged by air quality. But the actual timbre, the specific quality that made it his voice, gone. Micah's face was gone too. I retained facts, 14 years old, gap in teeth, dark hair, but I could no longer see him in my mind's eye. I tried to grieve this loss. I tried to feel something. The emotion wouldn't come. Or perhaps it came and I no longer recognized it as emotion. Perhaps grief had become just another sensation, like the pain in my arm, continuous, present, meaningless. During display hours, I began to notice patterns in pilgrim behavior. 73% would weep. 42% would attempt to touch my robes. 18% would try to touch my exposed hand. Security always prevented direct contact. The radiation levels were dangerous for unprotected individuals. But they tried. I realized I was calculating percentages. When had I learned to do that? The factorum had required only basic counting. But now I found myself automatically tracking, measuring, quantifying. The regenerative compounds, I later learned, sometimes caused unexpected neural development. My brain was being altered by the same chemicals keeping my arm alive. I was becoming something else. Not just physically. My thought patterns were changing, becoming more mechanical, more observational, less emotional. Things don't hurt, 592 had signed. He was right. In year 3, we received new assignments. Several reliquaries had died, their bodies finally succumbing to catastrophic cellular failure, and were being replaced. The mobile units were reorganized. I was transferred to Cathedral Ship Eternal Devotion, a massive vessel that never made planetfall, serving as an orbital shrine for the faithful wealthy enough to afford transport to high orbit. The quarters were better. Actual rooms instead of dormitory cells. Better food, real meat occasionally, not just corpse starch. Longer rest periods between display hours. But the displays were longer too, 12 hours per day instead of 8. And the pilgrims were different, wealthier. They came dressed in fine robes, accompanied by servants, carrying offerings of precious metals and gems that would be added to the cathedral's treasury. They were no less desperate than the hive-worlders. Money did not insulate anyone from disease, death, or despair. They wept just as readily. They begged with equal fervor. The saint's bone remained silent. The emperor, they claimed, protected. But protection, if it existed, never manifested in any measurable way. I stopped watching their faces. Instead, I looked past them, focusing on the cathedral architecture. The vaulted ceilings were painted with frescoes showing the emperor's ascension, his battle against Horus, his eternal vigil upon the golden throne. The images were technically impressive. Perspective, shading, color, but they depicted events I knew were interpreted through millennia of propaganda and mythologization. The priests taught that the emperor was divine, that he actively protected humanity through psychic projection from the golden throne. But if he was divine, why did he allow the suffering I witnessed constantly? Why did children die of diseases that pilgrims begged him to cure? Why did entire worlds fall to Xenos invasions despite fervent prayer? The logical conclusion was either he was not divine, or divinity was indifferent to suffering. Either way, the prayers were meaningless noise. I thought these things during display hours, my mind working through logic chains while my arm died, and lived and died. In year 5, something shifted. The lead priest of the cathedral ship, High Ecclesiarch Mormundus, summoned me to his private chapel. They deactivated my vocal inhibitor. First time in 5 years I'd been permitted speech. My voice was strange. Rough, unpracticed, like learning a language forgotten. Why, I managed. I wish to speak with you as one rational being to another, Mormundus said. He was old, perhaps 90, with extensive augmetics replacing his failing organs. His eyes were still human, though, pale blue, sharp with intelligence. You serve admirably, he continued. Never a complaint, never resistance. Your displays are flawless. But I observe your eyes during ceremony, Reliquary 743, and I wonder what thoughts occur behind them. I said nothing. Speech was possible, but dangerous. You may speak freely here, Mormundus said. I've disabled all recording devices. This conversation is entirely private. I wish to understand what you think of your service. I think, I said slowly, voice cracking, that I am a prop. A display stand for dead bone. That pilgrims pray to something that cannot hear. That their prayers go unanswered because there is nothing to answer them. I waited for punishment. Instead, Mormundus nodded. An entirely rational conclusion, he said. And yet, you serve without resistance. Why? Because resistance means death. Compliance means survival. Survival as what? You are not the man who was selected. That young Factorum worker is gone. What are you now? The question struck something deep. I had no answer. Mormundus leaned forward. I will tell you a secret, Reliquary. I do not believe the Emperor is divine. I have studied the historical texts. The real ones, not the propaganda. He was a man. Extraordinarily powerful, perhaps the most advanced human to ever exist, but a man. Not a god. My breath caught. This was heresy, absolute, execution-worthy heresy. And yet, Mormundus continued, I serve the ecclesiarchy faithfully. I conduct ceremonies. I teach doctrine I know to be false. Why? Because the Imperium requires it. Humanity is besieged by horrors that would destroy us utterly. The only thing holding civilization together is structure, hierarchy, belief, obedience. The theology is a tool, like your embedded bone, like the cathedrals, like everything. Tools to maintain order so that humanity survives another day. He stood, moving to a viewport that showed the planet below. You are part of that tool. Your suffering maintains faith. Pilgrims see you and believe their own suffering has meaning. They return to their lives capable of enduring because they have witnessed martyrdom and found it sacred. You hate this. I understand. But consider, if your suffering prevents even one world from falling into despair and chaos, if it keeps even 1 billion people functioning within the Imperium's structure, has it not served a purpose? A purpose I didn't choose, I said. None of us choose. I was born to an ecclesiarchy family, trained from childhood. My path was determined before I could speak. Your selection was abrupt, violent, unchosen, but the lack of choice does not negate the utility. He turned back to me. I am offering you something, Reliquary. A choice now, even if you had none before. You can continue serving as you have, resenting every moment, withdrawn into mental isolation. Or you can accept your role consciously. Understand that you are part of something larger, that your pain, however meaningless to you personally, creates meaning for billions, that you are, in a very real sense, helping to hold civilization together. And if I choose the first option, I asked, then nothing changes. You continue as you are, but I thought you deserved the opportunity to find purpose in your suffering, even if that purpose is constructed rather than inherent. He reactivated my vocal inhibitor before I could respond. The conversation was over. I returned to my quarters and examined myself in the reflective panel that served as a mirror. I was 24 years old. My face had aged. The regenerative compounds caused accelerated cellular turnover everywhere, not just in my arm. I looked 35, perhaps 40. My hair was shot through with grey. My right arm was a horror. The flesh was in mid-necrosis stage, grey-black peeling in sheets. Beneath, pink tissue was already bubbling up. The cycle was down to 3 minutes now. I looked at my eyes. They were still brown. Still human, technically. But there was something absent behind them. Some quality I couldn't name. Mormundus had asked what I was now. I didn't know. Not Andros Kellion. He was gone, forgotten even by himself. Not quite a thing, I still thought, still questioned. Something between. A tool that was aware of being a tool. Perhaps that was worse than being an unaware thing. But I thought about what he'd said. My suffering creating meaning for others. I thought about the pilgrims who wept before me and then returned to their lives, carrying some small comfort that they'd been near something holy. It was a lie. But if the lie helped them endure, was I not partially responsible for their continued function? This was complicity. I recognized it. I was being asked to participate consciously in my own exploitation, to accept the theological framework that had destroyed my life and call it necessary. The alternative was to maintain my hatred, my resistance, my insistence that this was wrong and meaningless. Neither option offered escape. Neither option ended the cycle of my hand dying and living. Over the following months, I found myself shifting toward Mormundus's framework. Not because I believed it, but because having a framework, even a constructed one, made the hours more bearable. If I was maintaining civilization, even through deception, then at least there was a reason. I began to observe the pilgrims differently during display hours, not with contempt for their delusion, but with a kind of clinical interest. What specific needs brought them here? What psychological mechanisms made prayer comforting even when unanswered? I was becoming an observer of my own display, studying the system I was part of, analyzing the machine that had consumed me. By year 7, I had perfected this detachment, I could stand for 12 hours, arm raised, hand dying and living, while my mind catalogued pilgrim behaviors, architectural details, the subtle ways priests manipulated crowd flow to maximize emotional impact. I noticed that emotional displays peaked in the third hour of any prayer session, early enough that pilgrims were still fresh, late enough that crowd psychology had built momentum. I noticed that the lighting was calibrated to make my necrotic flesh appear more dramatically damaged than it objectively was. I noticed that the hymns played during display hours used specific frequencies known to induce mild euphoria in human neurology. Every element was engineered, calculated, designed to maximum effect. I was the centerpiece of a magnificently constructed theater of suffering, and I'd become aware enough to appreciate the craft even as I remained its victim. This was not peace. This was not acceptance. This was a kind of madness that looked like functionality. In year 10, they upgraded my implants. The original regenerative compound reservoirs were depleting, requiring surgical replacement. They took the opportunity to install additional augmetics, enhanced nutrient processing to support the continuous cellular regeneration, improved pain management systems, cognitive enhancers to prevent the brain degradation that had claimed several older reliquaries. I woke from the surgery feeling sharper than I had in years. The pain was still present, still the constant wrongness of flesh dying and living, but distant now, as if happening to someone else. The cognitive enhancers were remarkable. I could think faster, process information more efficiently, hold multiple complex analyses simultaneously in working memory. My observations of pilgrim behavior became more sophisticated. I began recognizing patterns I hadn't noticed before. The way certain individuals' desperation matched specific societal pressures, the correlation between planetary economy and prayer intensity, the subtle differences in theological interpretation between hive-worlders and void-born. I was becoming a scholar of my own exploitation. It was fascinating in an abstract way. By year 11, I had been serving as Living-Reliquary 743 for longer than I had been Andros Kellian, Factorum worker. More of my life had been spent as a display object than as a human with autonomy. Mathematically, I was now more reliquary than man. I tried to remember the last time I had thought about escape. Years ago, certainly. The desire had faded not because escape became impossible, but because escape became meaningless. Escape to what? I was no longer capable of normal human function. My arm required continuous regenerative treatment. My cognitive augmetics required regular maintenance. I was dependent on the system that imprisoned me. Even if I somehow escaped, I would die within weeks as my augmetics failed and my arm necrotized beyond regeneration's capacity to heal. The trap was complete, not just physical, but existential. I had been transformed into something that could only exist within the structure that had created it. During display hours, I sometimes made eye contact with individual pilgrims. This was technically against protocol. Reliquaries were supposed to maintain distant, sacred bearing, but the guards had stopped enforcing minor violations. They recognized I was reliable, that I would stand my 12 hours without incident. I looked into their eyes and saw the same desperation I had felt at 19, standing before the ecclesiarchy priests in the factorum, knowing I had no real choice. They had no choices either. Life had crushed them, disease, poverty, violence, loss, and they came here seeking something to make the crushing bearable. The saint's bone gave them nothing. The emperor they prayed to was either absent or indifferent, but the ritual itself, the act of coming here, of witnessing suffering greater than their own and calling it holy, that gave them something, permission to continue, a framework for endurance. We were all tools. Me standing here, them kneeling there, the priests managing the theater, the Imperium grinding forward over uncounted human lives. Tools in a vast machine that existed only to perpetuate itself. The horror was not that the machine was evil. The horror was that it might actually be necessary. That without this crushing hierarchy of suffering, humanity might truly collapse into something worse. Mormundus had offered me that framework in year 5. I had resisted it then. Now, in year 11, I didn't have the energy to resist, or perhaps I had finally accumulated enough observation to recognize he might be right. The universe in which I existed was not one where justice or compassion or individual autonomy mattered. It was one where survival was the only objective, and survival required structures so brutal they destroyed everything human about the humans they claimed to protect. And I had become part of that structure, not just as a victim, but as a functioning component. My suffering served a purpose within the machine. The purpose was horrible, but it was purpose nonetheless. On the 11-year anniversary of my selection, I stood during display hours and calculated how many cycles my hand had completed. 3 minutes per cycle now, 20 cycles per hour, 240 cycles per 12-hour display day. I had served approximately 3,650 days, accounting for variations in display schedule. 876,000 cycles, 876,000 deaths and rebirths of my hand. The number was staggering, meaningless. What did it matter if I had experienced this horror once or 1,000,000 times? Repetition did not make it less horrible, but it did make it normal. Expected. The default state of my existence. I was a thing that suffered cyclically so that others could witness suffering and call it sacred. That was my function. I performed it efficiently. Somewhere, impossibly distant, almost inaccessible, a tiny fragment of consciousness that had once been Andros Kellyan screamed in horror at what I had become. But the scream was very, very quiet and getting quieter. And so I stand here in the chapel of enduring devotion, my right hand burning with the cold fire of perpetual dying. The flesh peels away in sheets of gray-black necrosis, and beneath, pink tissue erupts in moist bubbles of regeneration. The cycle completes every 73 seconds now. It has accelerated again. For 11 years, 4 months, and 16 days, I have counted. 300 pilgrims are bowing before me. Their foreheads press against stone worn smooth by 10,000 prostrations before me. They pray to my hand. Not to me, to the thing embedded in my palm, the fragment of knuckle bone from Saint Celestria the twice martyred, yellowed and ancient, visible through the circular wound that has never closed. They are weeping, many of them. I observe the patterns of their tears, how they track down faces, darkening robes at the collar. I observe the rhythm of their prayers, the way their lips move in synchronized recitation of litanies they have memorized. I cannot feel contempt for them anymore. I cannot feel much of anything. The cognitive augmetics have stabilized my psychological state. The priests call it elevated serenity. which is a polite term for the careful elimination of emotional responses that might interfere with function. I look down at my hand. The necrosis is at stage 2. Tissue breakdown, black edges, peeling. In approximately 30 seconds, it will reach stage 3 and begin regenerating. I have witnessed this 876,512 times. No, 876,513. The cycle just completed while I was counting. A young man kneels in the front row. He cannot be more than 20. His face is gaunt, malnourished. Hive-worlder, certainly. He stares at my hand with absolute desperation, lips moving in prayer. He is asking for something. Employment, perhaps. Or food. Or healing for someone he loves. The saint's bone will not grant it. I know this with absolute certainty. The bone is dead calcium, irradiated on ancient battlefields, no more capable of granting wishes than the stone floor beneath his knees. But he believes. His belief is real, even if its object is not, and his belief might carry him through today, through tomorrow, through the next year of suffering until he dies or is ground down completely by the Imperium's endless appetite. My suffering enables his belief. Therefore, my suffering enables his survival, however temporary. This is the logic I have accepted, not because I believe it is good, but because I believe it is accurate. The prayer session continues for another 4 hours. I stand, arm raised, hand dying and living, while 300 desperate humans seek meaning from a piece of dead bone. When they finally file out, the guards release me from display posture. I lower my arm. The muscles have long since adapted to extended elevation, but there is relief in returning to neutral position. I walk to my quarters, passing other reliquaries in the corridor. We do not acknowledge each other. We are not encouraged to form bonds. In my quarters, I sit on the simple cot and examine my hand. The necrosis has stabilized at mid-forearm. The regenerative compounds are maintaining perfect balance now. The damage does not spread, but neither does it diminish. I will exist in this state until the compounds cause catastrophic cellular failure, which statistical models suggest will occur in approximately 19 to 29 more years. 19 to 29 more years of this cycle. The fragment of consciousness that had once been Andros-Kellian would have found this prospect intolerable. But I am no longer primarily Andros-Kellian. I am Living-Reliquary 743, functioning component of the Ecclesiarchy's vast apparatus of control through manufactured sacred suffering. I am content with this. Content is not happiness. Content is the absence of resistance. In year 12, new reliquaries arrive. The cathedral ship takes on 3 replacements for reliquaries who have died or degraded beyond function. I watch them process through orientation. Young men, all between 18 and 25, all wearing the same expression of horror and disbelief I must have worn 11 years ago. One of them makes eye contact with me during a group display. He is 19, dark-haired, thin. He carries a fragment of St. Justinian's jaw embedded in his chest. The flesh around it has been removed, replaced with a crystal window. His lung is visible beneath, pink and pulsing. His eyes beg me for something. Explanation, hope, confirmation that this is survivable. I stare back with perfect neutrality. My vocal inhibitor prevents me from speaking, but even if I could speak, what would I say? That it gets easier because you stop being human enough to suffer properly. That the horror never ends but becomes background noise. That he should give up hope now and save himself years of useless resistance? None of these truths would help him. He will discover them himself, in time. I break eye contact and return my attention to the architectural details of the cathedral ceiling. There is an interesting pattern in the fresco work. The artist used a specific shading technique to create depth in the emperor's armor. I spend the next 3 hours analyzing the technique, cataloging the brushwork. This is what I do now. I observe patterns, I analyze systems, I exist in a state of perpetual documentation of my own display. The new reliquary weeps during his first display. The guards allow it. Vocal inhibitors don't prevent tears. He will learn to stop weeping eventually. Not because the pain decreases, but because tears become irrelevant. Just another fluid secretion, no more meaningful than sweat. By year 15, I have served longer than 70% of reliquaries in recorded history. High Ecclesiarch Mormundus calls me in for another private conversation. My vocal inhibitor is deactivated. "You are remarkable," he says. "Most reliquaries experience psychological deterioration by year 10. You are stable, functional, efficient. Do you know why?" "The cognitive augmetics," I say. My voice is rough but functional. "Partially. But I believe it's more than that. I believe you have achieved something rare. Genuine acceptance. Not the broken acceptance of trauma victims, but intellectual acceptance. You understand your role and have integrated it into your identity." "I am a tool," I say. "Tools do not require acceptance. They simply function." "Precisely, and you function beautifully." He pauses. "I am considering recommending you for extended service. Normally, reliquaries are retired at catastrophic cellular failure, but new regenerative compounds are being developed. With upgraded systems, you could potentially serve another 40 to 50 years. Perhaps longer. 40 to 50 years, another 1,500,000 cycles of my hand, dying and living. I am offering you a choice," Mormundus continues. "When your current compounds begin to fail, you can accept retirement, which means a peaceful death, painkillers and sedation until your systems shut down. Or you can accept the upgrades and continue serving. Extended duty would come with certain privileges. Better quarters, increased autonomy, your own servitor assistant." "Why are you offering this choice?" I ask. "Because you are valuable. Because reliquaries of your stability are extraordinarily rare. And because I believe you, uniquely among all the reliquaries I've overseen, might actually choose extended service." He is right. The fragment that was Andros Kellion would have chosen death instantly. But I am no longer Andros Kellion. I am a tool that has become aware of its function and found the function sufficient. "I will consider it," I say. "You have 5 years before the decision becomes medically necessary," Mormundus says. "Think carefully." My inhibitor is reactivated. I return to my quarters. I think about death, painkillers and sedation and the gradual shutdown of biological systems until nothing remains. Oblivion, peace, an end to the cycle. I think about extended service, decades more of this existence, millions more cycles. Continued function as a component in the vast machine. Both options are equally empty. Death is meaningless. Extended service is meaningless. The only difference is duration. But extended service has one quality death lacks. I would continue to observe, continue to analyze, continue to document the patterns of human desperation and manufactured sacred suffering. There is something compelling about that. Not compelling enough to call it desire, but compelling enough to call it preference. I suspect I will choose extended service. In year 17, during a rare rest period, I am visited by the new reliquary, the dark-haired one with St. Justinian's jaw in his chest. He has survived 3 years, which suggests he will survive longer. The weak ones die quickly. We are in the common area, a small chamber where reliquaries are permitted to gather during off-display hours. There are 7 of us present. No one speaks. We all have active vocal inhibitors, but we have developed an elaborate sign language. The new one signs to me, "You, longest service here." I sign back, "Yes, 17 years." He signs, "How survive?" I consider how to compress 17 years of transformation into simple signs. Finally I sign, "Stop fighting. Become thing. Things endure." He signs, "But still you, still aware." I sign, "Aware, yes, but not same person. Person you were, dies. Different thing, continues." He signs, "Want die." I sign, "Yes, for years. Want die." Then stop wanting. Wanting is human. We becoming not human. He stares at me, his young face twisted with despair. He signs, "No, refuse. Stay human." I sign, "Good luck. He will not succeed. No one succeeds. The system is designed too perfectly. The physical transformations force psychological transformations. The body changes. The brain adapts. The person dissolves into function." I watch him walk away, shoulders hunched, one hand unconsciously touching the crystal window in his chest, where his lung pulses visibly. He will sign the same message to someone else in 5 to 7 years, telling them to stop being human, to become a thing, because things endure. The cycle continues. The system perpetuates. I think about what the Imperium is, not what it claims to be. Protector of humanity, bulwark against darkness, sacred institution ordained by divine emperor, but what it actually is. The Imperium is a machine that consumes humans and produces more machine. It takes people like 19-year-old Andros Kellyan, Factorum worker who dreamed of seeing stars, and transforms them into components. Living reliquaries, servitors, soldiers, bureaucrats, priests, every one of them ground down, reshaped, integrated into the vast mechanism. The machine perpetuates because it has evolved perfect methods of self-replication. It doesn't require belief, though it manufactures belief efficiently. It doesn't require willing participation, though it manufactures the appearance of willingness. It simply requires enough humans feeding into its input mechanisms and enough structure to process them into components. The theology is a control system. The emperor is propaganda. The saints are mythology, built on fragments of historical persons distorted beyond recognition. The prayers are psychological conditioning. The entire apparatus is engineered to extract maximum utility from human suffering, and yet it functions. Humanity survives after a fashion. Worlds remain inhabited. The species continues. The alternative, if Mundus was correct, might be something worse. Chaos, dissolution, extinction. Is a horrible machine better than oblivion? Is my suffering, multiplied across billions of humans in similar positions, an acceptable price for species survival? I don't know. I suspect there is no correct answer. Morality might be irrelevant at the scale of galactic civilization, where the only meaningful metric is persistence. I persist. The Imperium persists. The cycle continues. During display hours, I look at the pilgrims and see the machine processing them. They arrive desperate, seeking meaning. They are given ritual, theater, manufactured sacredness. They leave marginally more capable of returning to their crushing lives. The machine has successfully processed them, extracted their worship, sent them back to their positions as components. I am the component they worship. My suffering is the fuel that makes their processing effective. We are all components, all fuel, all parts of the machine that exists only to perpetuate itself. There is no outside, no escape, no alternative. Only the machine, vast and intricate and eternal. I have become capable of observing this without emotional response. The cognitive augmetics help, certainly. But even without them, I think I would have reached this state eventually. Pure observation, pure analysis, pure function. I am a tool that understands. It is a tool. Perhaps that is the only form of enlightenment possible in a universe designed around endless consumption of human meaning. Year 19 arrives. My regenerative compounds are beginning to fail. The medical servitors have detected early signs. The regeneration cycle is slowing, now taking 87 seconds instead of 73. Within 2 to 3 years, the compounds will reach critical depletion. High Ecclesiarch Mormundus summons me. My vocal inhibitor is deactivated. Have you decided? He asks. Yes, I say. I will accept extended service. He shows no surprise. I thought you would. You understand what this means? Complete overhaul of your regenerative systems, enhanced augmetics, possibly more extensive implantation. You will become less biological, more synthetic. I understand, I say. I am already more synthetic than biological in any meaningful sense. Completing the transition is logical. You will serve another 40 to 50 years minimum, potentially longer if the new compounds perform as expected. I understand, I repeat. Why? Mormundus asks. Most reliquaries choose death when given the option. What makes you choose continuation? I consider this carefully, because, I say slowly, I have become interested in how long the machine can perpetuate. I wish to observe, and observation requires existence. Mormundus smiles, a rare expression. You have become a scholar of your own exploitation. Fascinating. Very well. The surgeries will begin next month. You will be assigned upgraded quarters during the transition period. Welcome to extended service, Reliquary 743. My inhibitor is reactivated. The surgeries take 6 months. They replace 70% of my internal organs with synthetic versions. They install advanced neural augmetics that increase cognitive processing speed by a factor of 3. They replace my regenerative compound reservoirs with systems that will function for estimated 80 to 90 years before requiring replacement. When I wake from the final surgery, I feel different, clearer, faster, less human, more mechanism. I examine my hand. The necrosis cycle is now occurring in 60-second intervals. The new compounds are more aggressive. But my pain perception has been reduced to nearly nothing. The wrongness is still present, but distant, irrelevant. I return to displayed duty. The pilgrims are unchanged, still desperate, still weeping, still praying to dead bone. I stand before them, arm raised, hand dying and living and dying in perfect 60-second cycles, and I observe with crystalline clarity the machine processing human desperation into continued function. I will stand here for another 40 to 50 years, perhaps longer. I will witness millions more prayers, Millions more cycles of death and rebirth in my flesh. I will observe the patterns, analyze the systems, document the machine. And somewhere, buried beneath layers of augmetic enhancement and psychological adaptation and pure mechanical function, a tiny fragment of consciousness that was once a 19-year-old boy named Andros Kellion, who dreamed of seeing stars, will continue its silent scream. But the scream is irrelevant now, inaudible, less real than the cycle of my flesh dying. My name was Andros Kellion. Now I am Living-Reliquary 743. I am a walking pedestal for a piece of dead bone. The bone is silent. The emperor they pray to is absent or indifferent. The machine continues, and I will continue within it for decades more, observing the vast horror of which I am one tiny, suffering component. The cycle completes. Death and rebirth. Again, forever. Or until the machine determines I am no longer useful and discards me like it discards everything. Either way, I will continue counting,